way, I'm just putting that out there, right? So what that's saying is that we are seeing greater strategies for the first time in a very transparent way that makes sense. And I'll have one for you that has worked. The City University of New York has said, we know that we are getting more than half of our applicants who need remediation. And they're exhausting, they're tap and Pell, right? And going in a cycle. There's nothing worse than knowing you're paying for something that has no credit towards your degree. Could you imagine? You want to talk about resiliency. And you could do that for years, right? So what they said is they're starting a program now, and they have a pilot of about 4,000 students where they defer. They say, you are not prepared. You can defer for a semester, and for $75, we will give you all the prep. Listen to that. Listen to that. Not using your Pell, all right? And you know what? 75% of those students who finish CUNY START have already passed 2 levels of remediation tested out of them and can enroll into college. That was an innovative state idea that did not take money out of the student's pocket, but kept them on the road. And I'm giving that as an example, and I do not think that would have happened if there wouldn't have been the push for transparency around really seeing abysmal graduation rates, seeing the cycle of people not getting out, particularly Latinos not getting out of remediation. So I put transparency has pushed for something like that. I think it's a great model. Others, would you like to add? Okay. All right. One last thing in closing this. We talked about it. People said we're preaching to the choir. The truth is we don't know who the sopranos are, the altos are. We don't know who the group really is here. And there's an enormous amount of resources here. Melanie, it was great having you come up. I love to have read about it, so now it's nice to have a name and face to it. But there would be, if you could find a way to really do some exchange here, then that makes these kinds of events that much more beneficial. And with that, I would love to thank this incredible panel. Thank you very much.
I'm Althea Gonzalez with Hispanics in Philanthropy. We are a transnational organization here in the United States and in Latin America, helping to bring funders and Latino philanthropy together to support Latino communities, strengthening Latino communities across our nations, plural, because we are one global world, right? And so we do a variety of projects, and one of them in particular here in the Triangle is what has surfaced this fabulous event, the Triangle for Latino Student Success project, which is funded by the Lumina Foundation. And it has given us an opportunity to work with grassroots organizations here in the Triangle region, Durham, Wake, and Johnson County, and to partner with all the school systems in those counties and the wonderful higher ed institutions we have, and a variety of partners. And we're very excited to have you all here to discuss Latino education, not just in North Carolina, but really in our country, and look forward to the forum at the end of this month, a couple weeks, to discuss education in North Carolina. A few pieces that I wanted to lift up before I introduce you to our speakers is our wonderful student this morning talked about we are all created equal. And for Hispanics in Philanthropy, that is absolutely the case. We are definitely social justice, human rights kind of organization, believing that all Latinos, just like all human beings, have a right to education, to liberty, pursuit of happiness, all those pieces. So we honor both our documented and undocumented students who are really trying to make a way for themselves and their families. Also want to lift up the fact that K-12 or higher ed can't do it alone. Government can't do it alone. And so we are definitely invested, literally, financially, and emotionally, tactically, in supporting our grassroots nonprofits organizations that help provide some of these support services that we've heard about repeatedly today. The wraparound services that sometimes when a student or a family can't access the resources that they need to succeed, or the encouragement they need, or the belief by someone in their community that they can succeed, they can access that in some of our community organizations like the Latino Memphis, who was here earlier. And that transforms their trajectory from something that it could have been horrifically before. So we are very much proponents of working with our grassroots communities to strengthen our Latino communities. I want to give a couple pieces of context as well. And is Deborah Santiago still here? I don't want to misquote her, but she was talking to us yesterday about some of the statistics which she mentioned earlier today. And we certainly understand, as the President does, as the Lumina Foundation, as all of us in philanthropy understand, that educating all of our youth is important, and to reach some of the goals that the President has and so forth, unless we educate our Latino students, we're never going to reach that global competitiveness that we aim for. So there is obviously an economic imperative that motivates us. There's an ethical imperative from a human rights standpoint, but there's also a personal imperative that I want to lift up. Last year I had the privilege of receiving my AARP card, and Deborah highlighted that by 2050, 1 in 2 workers who are supporting my Social Security check are going to be black and brown. So, you know, I want those workers to be doing something besides construction jobs. I want them to be doing some high-paying, wage-earning position that makes it possible for their families to succeed and makes it possible for me to succeed as well. And so I think there's so many multiple arguments to make about the importance of educating our students. So you pick one, whichever one works for you. It's the ethical thing, it's the economic thing, it's the personal thing, and let's get it done. So I want to welcome our panelists here. First, we have Steve Pearson from IBM, and then Gina Anderson from the Triangle Community Foundation. You may notice that our last speaker is not Jacob Ferrer from TG. Jacob could not make it. Southwest couldn't get him here on time, and so I had the privilege of emailing Mark Sorrells this morning at 6 a.m. and saying, Mark, can you please help out? So I will give you, since his bio is not in your program, a quick overview of why he was like the right choice to put on this panel. So Mark is the Senior Vice President for the Golden Leaf Foundation, Long-Term Economic Advancement Foundation. In his current position, Mark serves as the Chief Operating Officer, assisting the President with day-to-day operations. Additionally, he has served as lead project manager for several special initiatives, including the Biomanufacturing Workforce Training Initiative, the Aerospace Manufacturing Training Program, the North Carolina Digital Learning Technology Initiative, and STEM grant programs. He also was previously the executive director of a statewide nonprofit, so he has that grassroots experience, and a teacher in the North Carolina Community College system, so he knows of what he speaks for sure. And he's also served on several state-level boards, which I think is part of the influence that he has, including the Commission on Workforce Development and an advisor to the Jobs Commission. So he understands this pipeline picture that we're talking about, and it's not just getting through K-12, it's not just getting through higher ed, it's getting all the way to workforce. And particularly, Mark, through Golden Leaf, works in our rural communities, of which in North Carolina, there are about 85 rural counties out of our 100. So we're talking about a lot of folks who have major under-resourced barriers to getting a good education. So with that, I'd like to have Steve go first from IBM and give us a few minutes about what IBM is doing in the educational field and investment.
Sure, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Steve Pearson. I'm a manager for corporate citizenship and corporate affairs for IBM. So I'm responsible for government relations, education, and philanthropy. I truly believe I have one of the most dynamic jobs at IBM because I can see the impact of the work that I do every day. So IBM has been an outstanding corporate citizen over the last 20 years, and I don't say that just because I work at IBM, but they've really done a great job in terms of using their philanthropic dollars and their human capital of their existing employees and retirees to make an impact in the communities that we live in and serve. So in terms of the Latino population, IBM has done, before we get to college access, it really starts in K-12 education. So IBM has done a number of initiatives in early childhood education, English as a second language, and literacy to really meet the needs of a growing population. In 2008, IBM held the Latino Competitiveness STEM Summit in New York City that brought together private sector policymaker and K-12 education to really talk about the pressing need and issue and concern for the Latino population of students being ready for STEM-related careers. And with that, in 2011, I think the biggest impact that IBM has had in terms of transforming the education model as we look at it now is that we created this model called with that, they can be first in line for jobs at IBM, or they can matriculate to a four-year school. It's innovative from the standpoint that it's just not IBM. So we've created these schools in New York and Chicago, and some of our industry partners are Verizon, Microsoft, Home Depot, SAP, Con Ed in New York as well. And I think the other innovative thing is when we talk about the Latino population and college access in New York and Chicago, just for the IBM schools alone, 96% of the students in New York are either African American or Hispanic. In Chicago, that number is at 90%. So it's a no-cost education, and there's no test entry requirement for the students to get in. So it's truly an opportunity for all students to get a quality education as well. And I think with that, I've heard it emphasized more than enough here about the joint public-private partnership with that. And I think I'll talk a little bit about it later today, but there are a number of innovative ways that IBM has been making a difference in terms of STEM education for underrepresented populations as well, not just within education, but within the nonprofit sector as well. So I thank you for having me today, and I look forward to this panel.
Thank you, Steve. Gina?
Hi, I'm Gina Anderson. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. I work with Triangle Community Foundation, so we are the local community foundation here in the Triangle. Community foundations are a little bit different than your typical private foundation in that we're geographically focused, and we're funded through a number of different sources. We serve three primary roles here in the community. We are a partner for donors, helping individuals and families and companies connect with causes that they care about. We are a funder of nonprofits, making grants to organizations doing good work in the area. And we're also a resource for important issues in our community. The first community foundation was started in Cleveland about 100 years ago. So it's a big year for the community foundation field. And Triangle Community Foundation is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. We were founded in 1983 with a gift of $1,000. So we've grown from those small beginnings to now serving Wake, Durham, Orange, and Chatham counties. And we hold assets of about $180 million right now, held in 800 different funds. On average, we grant about $13 million back into the community each year to support causes ranging from alma maters all the way to animal health and anything you could think of under the sun. The majority of our grant making is through our donor-advised funds, which have been established by individuals, families, and companies. And those donors are still very directly involved in how that grant making happens. So that's the individuals in our communities who see their generosity and help direct where that goes back into the community. With the help of our donors, we've been able to support some Hispanic students and families in a couple of different ways, primarily through our scholarship programs and also through some of our community programs. We host about 50 different scholarships. Each one has its own individual eligibility criteria and application and selection criteria. We have supported about 150 students annually with about $750,000. And we don't specifically track ethnicity with our scholarship recipients, but based on surnames and my best guesses, about a third of those have been Hispanic students in the last few years. We're fortunate to have two scholarships that are specifically for Hispanic students, one of which the founder is in the room with us, Ms. Diane Wannabe. The Tomorrow Fund for Hispanic Students annually awards about $130,000 to undergraduate students that are at any undergraduate college located in the state of North Carolina. The Tomorrow Fund requires that the secondary institution be providing some level of institutional funding to support those students. So we've helped leverage the donations from individuals within our community with the resources that the colleges have in order to support our Hispanic students. We receive about 50 student nominations each year, and of those 50, most of them have a GPA of at least 3.4 or higher, and they demonstrate a cumulative wealth gap of over $500,000. So obviously our resources can't help cover all of the need in that community. But we do award about 25 scholarships each year, and those scholarships range anywhere from $1,000 to $15,000 per student. We also hold the Scholars Latino Initiative Scholarship Fund, which some of you may be familiar with their program. They are a program based at UNC Chapel Hill that provides mentoring program can help overcome those. And the graduates coming out of that program are eligible to receive scholarships as well. A third of those graduates are about in the top 10% of their class, with GPAs ranging from 3.3 to 4.4. And the Scholars Latino Initiative awards about $30,000 each year to, it's around 10 students each year. We also have a couple other programs that are specifically for immigrant and refugee students. So while they're not exclusive for Hispanic students, they often support those, our Hispanic immigrants as well. The Felicia Brewer Opportunity Scholarship provides about $50,000 to one student each year to support a 4-year education. And the Achievement Scholarship for Refugees and Immigrants of Wake County also, I think Althea is beeping at me right now. The Achievement Scholarship for Refugees and Immigrants in Wake County also provides awards for students located obviously in Wake County. We also have our community programs that support the community as a whole, specifically focused, two of our focus areas are on youth literacy and community development that help build the support structures for students to be prepared for elementary, middle, high school, and eventually college, and also help support the community structures that can help lead to student success. So I'm glad to talk about more of those later, should you have more questions.
Thank you, Gina. And who knew that even on silent, it would be?
Well, that's all right, though.
Mark, would you?
Sure, thank you, Althea. First, let me thank each of you for being here today. It's a very important discussion, I think very rich discussion. I also want to thank the students. You are the reason that we need to be here and be about the work that is before us. And so I congratulate you on your success, your commitment, and the stories that you put before us today. The Golden Leaf Foundation was established out of the Master Settlement Agreement back in 1999, where the state sued the tobacco companies. North Carolina took half that money and established an endowment for the future of North Carolina. Our mission is to provide economic transition assistance to the rural, economically disadvantaged, and tobacco-dependent areas of the state. I talk about it in terms of 2 words, because I was raised in a tobacco, on a tobacco farm in a rural community. It's about hope and choice. We do that through a number of programs, but our priorities are economic development, agricultural diversification, workforce preparedness, and education. So I want to focus on the last 2. We have a number of programs. We're about a $920 million endowment. We distribute about $40 million a year across North Carolina. We can do statewide, but we are focused primarily on those 85 to 86 rural counties that are most economically disadvantaged. We have done some work in tobacco manufacturing, urban centers. One of our longstanding programs is our Golden Leaf Scholars Program. We put a little under $5 million a year in scholarships. One pocket of that is for students that are interested in going to a 4-year university, private or public, here in North Carolina. We provide tuition assistance. That amounts to $3,000 a year, over 4 years, $12,000. That is also open to students who are transferring from the community college system. In addition to the tuition assistance, we provide about $1 million of that $4 million a year for a leadership development and training program. We contract with the Center for Creative Leadership, which is an internationally recognized corporate leadership development institute here in Greensboro, North Carolina, to provide training and coaching to those 215 freshmen if they choose that leadership track through the year. They get trained, they get connected with a coach that will help them navigate their leadership journey, as well as help them identify an internship opportunity back in the rural community. We pay that internship experience as well. We're very interested in making sure that students have choice, that if they want to go back to their home community, they see the economic and employment opportunities that are there, and they're connected and have those relationships. We also provide scholarships to the community colleges. We go through the community college system. Those monies are parceled out to the community colleges that serve the rural counties of the state. Those monies are 75% dedicated to curriculum, 25% dedicated to continuing education. The money's not just for tuition, but we understand that many times it's the transportation, it's the child care, or other living responsibilities that deny students from being able to complete their college experience. And so we make that money available to them as well. We also are very concerned about access to quality education. Many of our rural communities don't have the physics or calculus classes that students need in order to pursue certain careers. So we've done a number of things. Number one, we are looking at STEM, and we have invested in STEM in grades 4 through 9 to help create access to quality STEM programs early so that students get hooked in how math and science is applied, hands-on learning, so that they are moving toward those core requirements and prepared for college when they get to that age. It's also about helping teachers. And so many of our STEM programs have connected with the Keenan Fellows at NC State University. One of the things we learned very quickly is that our teachers were saying, I know the core concepts, I don't know the applications. So they're providing experiences for teachers to go into industry and learn about how math and science is applied in industry, so they have confidence to come back and counsel students about the right classes to take so that they can be on track for those career targets. We've also invested in digital learning. We've made about a $35 million commitment and continue to work with NC State through the Friday Institute to help train and prepare students and teachers for digital learning. Then we've invested in the early college high schools in the state. We're very interested in students being able to get college credit prior to high school. Help them learn that experience, help them get a leg up, help them access the college courses that they need in order to move on to the university level. And then the last thing I would say, and I'll mention this a little bit more, we're very, very interested in developing career pathways. Now, I've heard the term pipeline, and sometimes when you talk about pipelines, you talk about, and people get the image of tracking. We want students to develop the core foundation to develop pathways, so if they do hit a hurdle along the way, there are other avenues and other options that are available that can keep them on track to reaching their ultimate goal of landing good jobs. And we do that. Right now we're working in advanced manufacturing. We're very interested in portable credentials that industry recognizes that gives students the ability to move and gain jobs wherever. And we're also interested in that transition from school to the workplace. So we're really pushing internships and apprenticeships and working to create collaborative structures in communities where it's not just education, but it's organizing the business and industry community to take responsibility. If there is a skills gap, let's collectively work together to solving it and to bring the community in.
Mark, perfect, because we are going to get more deeply into that collaborative piece, and I want you to share about that. My first question for the panel, and we'll have questions from the audience in a few minutes. My first question for the panel, and Steve, if you would start, is why does IBM care to invest in Latino education?
Well, we think it's a global competitiveness problem in terms of the K-12 pipeline. Our students aren't career and college ready, and more often than not, people say there are a lack of jobs here in the United States, but at any given point, there are over 1,200 jobs in IBM, high-skilled jobs that can't be filled, and that's a K-12 problem. So for us, it's about making sure all students, and specifically Latino students, because they have been underserved, have a fair chance to gain the skills necessary so that we can compete as a company globally, and we don't have to often outsource those jobs.
Great, so that's the global picture. Mark, can you give us why you invest in education?
students in rural areas don't have access to the technology, the quality labs, the quality instructors, as well as the content, how in the world can they compete on a global level? So it's leveling that playing field and bringing the same level of opportunity to students in the rural communities as those that live next to a university.
Gina, I want to ask you a question. I know the Triangle Community Foundation does an incredible job at donor relations and cultivating donors and educating them about what's happening in our community. Tell me a little bit about how the Triangle does that outreach and educates donors, whether it's to establish a scholarship or to support a new nonprofit. How does that happen?
So I think actually what we find is that a lot of our donors are interested in a lot of our emerging issues and our pressing issues, and sometimes it's the opposite, that the donors come to us saying, look, I really want to support Latino students. I know with our political climate, I don't know what to do. Can you help me make that connection? And I think a lot of our donors see education as a very tangible result that they can support. And so that's why where we see our scholarships is where we see a lot of our grants go through. Other ways that we do educate our donors, we have quarterly donors forums that we host obviously every quarter that are focused on specific issues. Right now they're focused on our community programs, we have focused on nonprofits, we have focused on Latino student issues in the past. So we do educate our donors that way. We have our e-newsletter, we have our social media. We're constantly contacting our donors to let them know what's going on in their community and ways that they can help.
Sometimes people think that the world of philanthropy is really only about giving money. And I think we have an opportunity both to educate our communities, like Gina was talking about, and also to convene, just like the White House has an ability to get us all here on a Friday. It is Friday, right? Yeah. We also, in philanthropy, often have the ability to bring people together to have conversations. And so, Steve, I'm wondering if you can share with us how IBM, you referenced some of the work in New York and Chicago, how IBM is bringing together partners around college access, and what are some of the partnerships and collaborations you've seen that have been most effective?
Sure. So one of the outcomes for the STEM Summit is the analytics around predicting average students or the need of average students before they get to the point where they're failing or they're dropping out. So IBM had a competitive grant application process, and they awarded Queensborough Community College a $250,000 grant to create an early morning tracking system for their students. They have a significant Latino population at that college as well, and they also have freshman academies for students to kind of keep them in line through that first year to ensure that they have a high level of success rate. But with that came a formal grant from IBM in a commercial solution called Decision Management for Education. So now we can use predictive analytics and innovative ways to help at-risk students at all levels of K through 12 education. Here in Durham, North Carolina, they were just awarded an analytics grant, and they will be doing some of that this year. And then also another large school system here in North Carolina will be using an analytics grant to look at some of their third grade data and see how they can better serve that underserved population. But when you talk about college access as well, I think one of the things that's often untapped or underutilized is public-private partnerships with the nonprofit sector. So IBM has a different way that it does philanthropy now. So more and more corporations are moving away from checkbook philanthropy and what we like to call smarter philanthropy. So we actually created a portfolio of services, software and services that we deploy to the nonprofit sector using our consultants, taking them away from their day jobs. But what we do is we have offerings like strategic planning, we have leadership development, project management, we have analytics grants, we have strategies in social media marketing. Because what we found is that the nonprofits that are having the largest impact, they have limited resources. So we want to help them become more sustainable from an infrastructure standpoint so they can help the communities and specifically the Latino population.
I love hearing about the early warning system. In North Carolina, a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, we talked about the number of minority students in third grade determines the number of jails that we're building in North Carolina. And I love the concept that we could look at the number of students who are at risk and do something about them at an early stage so they can actually instead be used, for productive data rather than destructive data. So thank you. Mark, would you share a little bit about, you were mentioning the piece in Hendersonville and how business is taking
Sure.
the lead?
So North Carolina is a very diverse so one size doesn't fit all. But a couple of initiatives that we've worked with to kind of bridge the gap between business and industry and education. One is here in Durham, made in Durham, where we invested to help get that initiative started. Another is in the Hickory area, Education Matters. But the one that Althea was referring to is in Hendersonville, where there's a major automotive supplier sector. And there were about 1,100 jobs available, and they could not fill those jobs. And industry was pointing the finger at education, saying, we've got a skills gap, what are you going to do about it? And education was saying, well, you know, we can't do it alone. So they got together with their public schools, the community college and public schools, and Western Carolina University, organized with their economic development commission, a group of industry leaders that are now working collectively. Each party has taken ownership of that skills gap and have a very defined and specialized role that they're playing. So for example, students that start out in the elementary programs, there are inquiry-based STEM education programs available to them. There are robotics clubs that are available. When they go to the middle school, again, there's that continuum. Students from the middle school are working with elementary students. And guess who is mentoring the students? We need teachers in the classroom that are much more diverse and look like the students that they're training. Well, that's a difficult thing to do. But guess what? Industry has been able to identify underrepresented populations, engineers, scientists, etc., to mentor those students through robotics and other school enrichment programs to really move the needle and create that opportunity going forward. So now it is a community working toward a common issue rather than individual organizations that are not collaborating across lines. So it's hard work, but it can be done, and based upon the assets in your community, it takes some effort to figure out who, what, when, where, and how, but really it is all about economic competitiveness and economic prosperity for all of our citizens.
I have one or two more questions for our panelists, but I wanted to let you all know that it'll be your turn to ask questions, so figure those questions out. We talk a lot about, and certainly in the nonprofit sectors, how do we engage businesses in our work? Anyone ever ask that question? Yeah. And maybe in governmental sections, how do we get business to the table? My question to start with, Steve, is what can business do, or what is business doing to engage our policy sector, our governmental sectors in both making better decisions about how they're deploying resources, particularly given the huge demographic shift in our country toward the majority-minority community.
Yeah, and I think for IBM, I mean, it's tied directly into the P-TECH model. So I think looking at how we allocate funds for education, career technical education, so you have things like the reauthorization of the Perkins Act, so how dollars are being allocated for career technical education, so we can replicate this P-TECH model nationally. So New York Governor Cuomo had an RFP for 16 schools to replicate P-TECH, and that was awarded last year. The state of Connecticut was awarded a P-TECH school, and they're launching it within the next year as well. But also getting the awareness and the help from the federal government. So the Obama administration, on top of President Obama visiting the P-TECH school, they had a federal grant called the Youth Career Connect grant. So it was a $100 million grant that different nonprofits and/or school systems could apply for to hopefully replicate the P-TECH model, or pieces of the P-TECH model locally within their own entities as well. So I think creating awareness and even
foundations work in the world of advocacy, which I know is a touchy subject, and how do you help promote good policy?
It is a touchy subject, so I think we tend to be very careful in our advocacy efforts, but because we are funded through so many different sources and by so many different donors, we never want to say the wrong thing or upset one person. So I think that our general policy is what's best for the community. We don't do a lot of advocacy ourselves. And I think participating in other efforts within the community is how we do that. We've been a participant with HIP and with the Triangle Latino Student Success Initiative. I think that's primarily how we do it, not the necessarily advocacy in the traditional sense.
I think it's important to lift up because sometimes we want business or philanthropy to go out there and pick it. And so there are other ways that we advocate kind of behind the scenes, and I want to make sure that people understand there's a variety of options here. I want to open it up to questions from the audience for our speakers around business or philanthropy or investment. And please say your name and where you're from, what organization.
My name is Delia Wimberly, and I'm here with a couple of my colleagues and one of our students from the Emily K. Center. And my question is specifically for Stephen. You mentioned there are some initiatives in terms of analytics and grants going around in terms of looking at that early warning monitoring system. At the Emily K. Center, we have the privilege, really, the opportunity of being able to serve students across a long period of time. We work with students first grade through their sophomore year of college. And we're really starting to look closely at not so much kind of the negative side of the early warning indicators, but specific indicators and metrics and benchmarks that students should kind of check off along the way to make sure that they're going to be successful to and through college. Is there any work or any initiatives that you specifically, since you mentioned that analytics, or any of you guys kind of know of that looks at some of the more positive indicators for students to achieve along their pathway to and through college?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have some specific great partners or organizations that we have worked with. So Gwinnett County in Georgia, they do a phenomenal job in terms of how they're using analytics in their benchmarks and positive factors in the success measures of their students as well. So I'd be happy to connect you with them for information that's public. But when I think of a K-12 system, they're at the forefront in terms of innovation when it comes to that.
Thank you. Mark, do you have anything to weigh in on about the metrics and the analytics?
You know, a lot of the schools that we work with digital learning are connecting to EBOS and using those predictors to look at success. You know, the challenge though is the communities and the experiences I've had, sometimes those predictors don't speak to the heart of students. And if students don't have access to the quality facilities and instruction, you know, they're held back. And so, you know, I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to chaperone 4 students from North Carolina, all that came from the School of Science and Math except for one, and that person went to a high school right next door to NC State University as they competed in the Beijing International Science and Creativity Competition. And we hear a lot about global competition. Our 4 students came back all with gold medals. But I reflected on that journey and thought about how many bright students I see from all walks of life, from rural communities, that could be just as talented and just as successful if they had equal access and equal opportunity and the same level playing field. And so that's where I have spent my entire work life trying to create that. And so I believe in the analytics, I believe in the predictors, but I also believe, because I was one who was told, you're not capable of going to college, you need to go back and work in your father's general merchandise store. Telling me no was the great motivator of my life, because I was able to get where I am today from being told say we're going to take our investments and try to strategically align it to where the economic opportunities are in our state. And so each year we go through an assessment and begin to think about the sectors that have high demand for employment that pay at or above the county average wage and state wage. And that's where we're putting our money. The issue around developing those sustainable partnerships, I go back to educators can't do it by themselves. So it takes county government, but it also takes the business and industry community. One of the examples I would put out is a recent investment that we did at Central Carolina Community College, where industry was saying, and Caterpillar is a major employer of theirs, we've got a skills gap. What do? We can't grow our business model, compete globally. We can't even compete internally in our organization if we don't do something about this gap. And so industry and education and government got together and said, what can we do? And so what they did, the community college had success coaches at the community college, but they recognized the challenge that school counselors have. There's just too much on the plate and they're stretched too thin. Also the challenge that educators have, you've got more on your plate, trying to, as education changes, it's, you know, today it's this initiative, tomorrow it's that initiative, today it's this standard, tomorrow it's another standard. It's hard to keep up. So what they've done is the community college developed career counselors that are employees of the community college that are funded by a public-private partnership, and they're placed in the public schools. And their job is to do nothing more than work with those 9th and 12th graders and begin to build the bridges within their community, the relationships with industry, the scheduling, the experiences, the enrichment programs that are needed to make sure these students have access. It's kind of a plug-and-play environment. Now, how do you sustain it? You've got to collect the data and go back and be able to say, here's your return on investment. And I'll give you a good example. For those of you that are connected to a community college, a few years ago, the ARA initiative out of the White House put soft money into the community college called the Job Now, the 12 and 6 programs. That was for instruction and tuition. Many of those colleges came and said, we don't have the equipment to train these students with technology that's being embedded in healthcare, being embedded in manufacturing, aviation. We put $3 million on the table very quickly to help seed those initiatives with the tools for students and teachers. After 1 year, I was able to go back and say that $3 million investment returned $21.5 million in new wages in our communities. And here's the evidence of it. And if you can turn around and say, for every dollar you invest, you get a $3, $4, $5, $6 return in your community, business gets it, industry gets it, government gets it, and they will want to invest in success.
Go ahead.
Sure. And I'm actually working on some a fascinating pilot in K-12 education here in the state that hopefully, if all goes well this summer, we can replicate nationally as well. But when you talk about, we've been talking to the state superintendent in terms of professional development for superintendents, for principals, as well as teachers as well. So for superintendents and administration, we have a bunch of new superintendents or some that are there and doing new strategic plans, but how can their administration adapt to change? So we're doing some professional development around change management so that they can adapt to the needs of the ever-changing needs of a school system. Then when we talk about principals as well, so with the increased competition between private schools, public schools, and charter schools, how can principals brand their schools as a school of choice? So we're talking about professional development through social media and marketing strategies, so principals can be better informed to brand their schools as a best in kind. And then when we talk about teachers, we're talking about professional development because we realize that there are a lack of resources for teachers. So leadership in a changing world, project management, strategy in the classroom, and then we have a bunch of free resources around how to integrate STEM, so we partner with the National Science Foundation, so how teachers can better integrate STEM into their classroom holistically as well. So I think there are a number of corporations doing some innovative things, and again, it takes that public-private partnership working with a state board of education or a state superintendent so we can replicate this throughout the state, because I think one of our pressing challenges, or corporations' pressing challenges, is that we typically do things where our populations reside, and I know in North Carolina we have a lot of rural communities, so it really takes that partnership with the state so we can do these types of leadership development grants in the eastern and western part of the state as well.
I think that's brilliant because Mark certainly shared with me earlier that in some of our rural communities in a 3-year period, they have 5 different superintendents. Can you imagine that kind of transition, let alone the principals who turn over so quickly? It's hard to create stability in the school system for the students, for the teachers, for the whole community. And so that professional development for principals and superintendents to hang in there and learn how to work is fabulous. I want to address one more piece of the question that was just asked, is that philanthropy is totally about relationships. And the more you have a conversation with Steve, not just about how much money can you give me right now or what can you give me right now, which I know Steve is going to get overwhelmed as soon as he steps off the dais here. But if you have a conversation about how can we work together, how can you bring in other partners, who do you know who knows someone who you know who knows someone, that kind of thing, then all of a sudden you have a community built. And that community has a lot of power in it to come up with creative solutions that are, unknown at the moment. So really leveraging philanthropy, not just for the short-term dollars, but for the long-term engagement of that relationship makes a huge difference in your nonprofit survivability, your school district survivability, really our community survivability. I don't see any other questions. I think we're almost at time. I wanted to make sure if you all had any parting, 1-minute message to the folks in policy out there and the folks in nonprofits and the school system from our philanthropic sector. What can they do? Should they do? What are your frameworks?
Sure. I think I've been inspired and enlightened by the discussions today, not only from the participants, but from the questions from the audience. But I think we all play a major role in determining college access for the Latino student population. But again, I think it's a strategic public-private partnership or strategic partnerships that what matters. And I think the most important thing is that we need to look at what's the return on investment, not only for you as an entity, but for the organization that you're partnering with. Too often I engage with people that may just have their hand out or only be thinking about them. But for me, I'm looking for organizations that are having the most impact, where I can engage my employee population so that they can feel a greater connection. And to me, I think the most important piece is sustainability. And then we want to bring it to scale. We just don't want to do it locally, but if something's innovative or an organization is doing something that is innovative, there's no reason why we can't do it globally, because there are tons of cities or countries that are facing the same problems that we're facing. So just be conscious of those things when you look to engage, whether it's a foundation or whether it's a corporation or even just some of your local community partners, because everything matters.
Gina, words of advice.
I think when we're looking at organizations that we're funding and looking at organizations in our community, the things that we want to see are organizations that are working efficiently and really providing those support structures. I see so many of our students that don't have the support structures in order to be successful, and so being able to provide that support and being able to demonstrate the success is really important when looking to a foundation, looking to find support.
Evaluation, I hear under there. Right?
Yeah.
Be able to talk about what you do well.
Yes.
And Mark, will you close us off?
It's 2 things. It's about building a culture of lifelong learning and aligning your work for career. So let me give you one clear example from a policy issue. And this is a conversation we normally bump into. Students get hooked in middle school with STEM education. They go to high school, they can't start really the career and college promise until 11th grade. So in 9th and 10th grade, there's really nothing there for them. And they get caught up in this competition toward the highest GPA. And then all of a sudden, you have a parent who comes let you take Project Lead the Way. Well, Dad, you know, that is a very rigorous course. It's very, very hard. And quality points are only 4. If I take population geography, and by the way, that's a guaranteed A. Quality points are 6. And guess what I did? I just jumped the ladder. I jumped a number of other students. And so I think we've got to think about leveling the playing field in what we've normally segregated out as an academic track versus a technical track, because it's all critical to our creating prosperous communities and the hope and choice for every individual, because we are individuals with very different levels of learning and interest and career aspirations.
Thank you. Please help me thank you.
So one of the things we did this week, actually, as we continue to talk about school counseling, we convened at the White House 16 School Counselor Association leaders and counselors to have a conversation with leadership from the White House, from the Domestic Policy Council, from the National Economic Council, from the First Lady's office. And you know what we did? We listened. We didn't tell them what the answer was. We didn't say, this is what you need to do, and this is what the President and the First Lady need you to do. We said, what do you think we need to do? And we listened. We had an hour-and-a-half session. We let them talk. We let them bring their presentations and their papers to tell us what we can do. And as you heard Marco mention, I spent the last 5.5 years working for Secretary Arne Duncan, and one of the things that Arne Duncan likes to say, and I like to quote, is the best ideas aren't really coming from Washington, D.C. They're coming out here in places like Durham and places out in the field where you're living this every day on the ground, and we do need and count on you guys to give us the answers and help us understand what's working. You have the data, you're on the ground, and what we can do from the federal perspective is shine a spotlight on that, scale that up, and use our convening authority, our bully pulpit, and when possible, our regulatory and other powers to lift that up, scale it, and bring that solution around the country and hopefully around the world. So that's sort of the big meta where we are. And I would just want to say one more thing, and then I'd actually just like to open it up for questions and conversation. How am I doing on time? All right, we're okay. And let me just say that you should really go and check out the First Lady's speech that she gave last week in San Antonio, Texas. You can go to reachhigher.gov to learn more. You can follow us on Twitter for @reachhigher, follow us on Instagram for @reachhigher2020. But if you read the First Lady's remarks in San Antonio, I think for her, you're going to understand that this is personal. You're going to understand that the challenge she's issuing also has a component of talking to kids, not just about, okay, here are the tools, this is the website, this is what you need to do, but it's a story of owning your own future, owning your success, and really a story of personal grit, determination, and stick-to-itness. Now, we know right now in education, grit, persistence, determination, it's sort of part of the popular conversation. But the First Lady is very clear with kids and students that it isn't just the adults that need to step up here and the leaders, but it's students themselves. They need to expect more from themselves, and actually, especially for the kids who are in difficult communities, maybe they have their own difficult family circumstances, some of their wherewithal that they've already demonstrated in life to get where they are actually strengths that are going to lead them to be much more successful in college, in their career, in their life. And that's a value that we need to honor as educators and as leaders. And I think that's what she wants to do to inspire this entire country, to help everyone else reach higher. So I am calling on all of you to step it up. Whatever you can do, we need your voice. We need you to sign up. We need you to do things that you're doing like this today, but also what are you really doing in your community to create that college-going culture? And that could be something like creating the San Antonio Signing Day. We're seeing cities and schools across the country saying, you know what, we celebrate the NFL draft, it was yesterday, like what are we doing to celebrate college signing days? What are we doing as a culture to say that this is the most important thing? Because if we want to be taken seriously for the next century, the way we were in the United States in this first century, in the 20th century, education is the key. I'll end with one quote and then I'd love to open up for questions. And we did a listening session this week also with school leaders who came in to talk to Dr. Biden, who's a teacher herself, and with Secretary Duncan. And the quotes kept coming back to Horace Mann, because this isn't rocket science, people. We've known since the 1850s, Horace Mann was the founder of the common school movement, and he said, education then, beyond all the other devices of human origin, is the great equalizer. It prevents being poor. The great equalizer, education. That's why the First Lady is calling on all of us to create this conversation around college going and post-secondary education, and that's why I'm really thankful for all of you for having me here today, and I'm thankful for your leadership, not just today, but in the days, months, and years to come. And with that, I'd love to take questions, thoughts, concerns, whatever you have. I will also take questions about Bo and the dogs. I won't take questions about her fashion. Yeah. And will you say your name as well?
Sure. My name is Erin Howard, and I'm the director of the Kentucky Latino Education Alliance. And thank you for being here and sharing all this information. I do have kind of two questions. I know this is about college access. However, in the work that I do at Bluegrass Community and Technical College and the Latino Outreach and Student Support Offices, I know the value of quality advising. It's not just focused on academics,
Yeah.
but also, wraparound support for the entire student and everything that they're experiencing in their life. So I'm curious if the listening session you had with the counselors also included college advising leaders as well.
Absolutely. So we had leaders from places like the National College Advisor Network, sort of most of the leadership cohort from that group. And I think what you said is absolutely true. You heard over and over from the school counseling community. I'll just go over some of the highlights that we heard, and I'm sure, and tell me if this speaks to you. Number one is that counselors feel like they aren't recognized, and really that it's a question of almost existential existence. Like you don't hear the name of counselors in conversations around policy, in conversations and decision-making conversations at the table. You hear about teachers, you hear about principals, but why aren't we talking about counselors as a key component? So one was sort of they exist and they matter. I think number two was feeling like there isn't a unified theory of how we want to describe what counselors do. They're actually one of the most highly educated members of the teacher workforce. We've got over 100,000 counselors in schools, over 80% of them with master's degrees or higher, and yet it totally varies in district to district, school to school, what they're doing. Are they, instead of counseling, are they being made to proctor tests? Are they going to training that has nothing to do with their experience and what they actually feel like they're there to do? And I was fascinated to hear from counselors who said they actually want to be accountable, but they don't feel like they're being brought into that conversation, whether it's going to be college access, college completion, but they need that clarity from principals, from superintendents, and from leaders in the school system that that's how they want to be in there. I think you heard a call for more research around school counseling. Actually, and this is really timely, on the plane ride over here, I was reading the College Board research paper that came out over a year ago about school counselors. It's one of the few ones you have, and they showed that if you could get one additional counselor in every school in America, you'd increase college going to four-year colleges by 10%. We usually don't talk about increase. People are excited about statistical significance of 0.1%, whatever. 10%. Imagine what that could mean. Think about your school. What does 10% more of those kids going to college look like? So absolutely, I think we need to be clear about what counselors are there for. We need to make sure that we're supporting them. We need to change those numbers or change scale with technology. And we really have to have a clear sense of how we're offering them the pipeline and the professional training both before they get to schools and after they're there to really take them seriously as game changers for the college going component.
Would love to know kind of the role of cultural competency and culturally responsive services and pedagogy, how that plays into her vision for the college access.
So absolutely, and unfortunately the numbers are tough, whether it's for teachers or whether it's for counselors. We know that a lot of the leadership in schools don't look like the populations they're serving. Now, Secretary Duncan has actually issued a call, teach.gov, to get more folks to we want more men, and especially men of color, to become school teachers, but it really should be about counselors and leaders in general. So I think school training and cultural competency absolutely has to be a core component of that, and counselors need that while they're getting trained, and again, there needs to be a broader conversation about what is the requirements to be certified as a counselor. Again, we have huge variance across states, across districts, but I think cultural competency absolutely has to be a key part of that. And that's why near-peer mentoring is so successful, because we know that students are much more responsive to people who they feel like are legitimate and authentic voices and actors for what they're doing. Thanks.
Hi, I have maybe 3 questions. The first one, if you could touch on any kind of topics they brought up around mental health and cognitive learning needs, especially in the minority communities and Hispanic communities, and helping them be more successful in their path to education. The other topic has to do with technology, and if there's any component within this initiative to make technology more accessible for these students, especially low-income or minority students, not only in the classroom, but in their communities. That there's a big disparity there, and not having access is preventing their access to apply for college. And then I have a third one.
There's at least 2.5 in here, so
yeah,
you're good.
That's good, okay, thank you.
Thank you for those questions. So the first one was about conversation around cognitive and mental health issues, especially in the Latino community or underserved communities. That actually did come up. We had one of the school counselors who presented as someone who himself actually was born in Mexico, came from an immigrant family, and now serves predominantly majority Hispanic community. And I think what you're hearing over and over is it's not just the issues of cognitive and mental health awareness, but also what are some of the predispositional biases that school leaders, counselors, and others have around English language learners, around Latino and other minority communities for what the expectation is. So how are we actually making sure that not only are we providing them the mental health services and support that they require, but are we actually, what are our inherent biases so that we really do expect, and that should really be the prerequisite as a school leader and as a school counselor, to expect that all your students are college material or higher ed material, and that we do want that, and that language challenges, cultural challenges shouldn't be an excuse to in any way have diminished expectations for those communities. So I think the cognitive mental health component is really important, and I think what you also heard was that, and we described this a little bit about what is the job description of the counselor, right? And in every school or community can be a little different, and we need to have a clear expectation of how much of that is college counseling, how much of that is mental health counseling. I think ASCA has a breakdown of what they think that ought to be, but there's no singularity, and we want to make sure that people are able to think about that, so that if it's not in the school counseling office, is it coming from somewhere else or supplemented? And I think the other thing I'd just add to that is that wraparound services, support services that we think of not just in the school, but for successful things like the Harlem Children's Zone, or what we do at the Department of Education for Promised Neighborhoods. How are we also, if we're not going to be able to scale or add more resources to a school per se through the district, what are we doing to make sure that we're partnering with community philanthropy, community organizations, so we're creating those wraparound services so that you're not relying only on the school, but you are using the school as a hub for those supports. I will answer your second question, which was about tech and accessibility. I think that is within the solution set of the things we're talking about in the First Lady's office. We may know or have heard the Department of Education and the President have called for E-rate, for billions of dollar investment in terms of our infrastructure to create much higher connectivity. I'm blanking on the numbers. I think it's like 95%. I don't know what the it's a technical number, but we're really trying to double and make high-speed connectivity part of every school in America, and actually that's going to be a game changer for rural communities and for urban, inner city, and all communities. Because now we know, I had the lousy physics teacher in high school, right? And when I had the lousy physics teacher, what am I going to do? Either do badly in physics, maybe I have a friend who can tutor me, or I don't know, or just never be good at physics for my life. But nowadays, we know that there's so much great content out there, whether it's free, massive open online courses, whether it's something like Khan Academy, or even just a great teacher or student or class down the street that is putting their information online. So we need to set that information free, whether it's on your mobile device, whether you're at home, whether you're in a school library. So we're really giving kids that opportunity. And I want to be respectful of time. Yeah.
Yeah, we're actually out of time because we didn't transition to our panel.
I can wait out if folks want to meet outside. I can answer some questions afterwards. I'm willing to stay behind.
Let's thank Eric.
So what we're going to do is we're going to break out into 3 small groups. Let me explain to you the process first for the conversations, and then I'll give you the topics afterwards so that you understand what it is we're asking you all to take on. So in a couple of minutes, I'll describe the 3 topics, and I'll list out the rooms that we're going to gather in. And then we're going to basically ask you to self-organize. You're going to vote with your feet. You're going to choose one of those topics and go to the corresponding room where that conversation is going to be had. When you get into that room, we will be on hand as resources for you, some of our staff. But honestly, as I mentioned, we're going to ask you to self-organize. We're going to ask you to get together as a group, appoint a facilitator among yourselves. I know you can do it. Appoint a facilitator among yourselves and try to answer 2 key questions. One is spend about 10 minutes, and this is all in your program, by the way, outlined at the 3 o'clock session. One is take about 10 minutes and make a list of what you think are the most critical issues in that topic area that really deserve the most attention, the most focus, the most devotion of energy and resources going forward. And by the way, all of these, the notes from these conversations are going to be captured and shared and put online so that, again, you all will be able to refer back to them and work from them going forward, but also others who weren't here can join in and perhaps even adapt some of that guidance to the work that they do in other communities throughout the country. So again, we also have 3 wonderful volunteer note takers here from the college who are going to identify themselves in just a second. So again, you will break into small groups, designate a facilitator among you, and you'll answer the 2 questions. One is, what are the most critical issues in the area? And then 2 is, what are actionable steps that you think we and everyone involved in this work should take? What are the top things? Obviously, we can spend a whole day on each of the subtopics. We could make very long lists. The idea is to try and prioritize what are the most critical action steps you can take to address at least a couple of those issues that you just identified. There's a question.
Michael, since we were able to get a little bit ahead of time, would you say everyone should be back here around 3:30 to report out?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Yes. So we're going to ask you to spend about 10 or 15 minutes identifying critical issues. Spend about 10 or 15 minutes with actionable steps, and then if you can, appoint a reporter who's going to come back when we gather, when we regroup, to report out and share, again, just the highlights. As a colleague of mine used to say that I really appreciate, we will have note takers, we will share the notes with everyone, so there is no need for you to rehash the entire conversation when you report out. If you just give us the highlights, the most critical pieces, ideally the top issues that were identified and the action steps that were designated, that's something for folks to think about, to look into, to then look forward to when the notes are shared. So far, so good on the process? Everything makes sense? All right. If I could have my 3 volunteer note takers come forwards to be identified, because you'll be able to follow them to the respective rooms when the time comes. Because we're going to do this quick and organized to allow time for the conversation. So here are our suggestions. For small groups, we listened throughout the day to the conversations. We sort of identified sort of common threads or themes that recurred throughout the different panels and discussions. Maybe some of the questions most focused on and so on. And so we tried to group them together in some areas that we thought would be of most interest to you. Wow, and I can no longer read my notes. That's what I get for writing while standing up. So the first one is, the first small group is, what are ways in which we, all parties, all hands on deck, can help to support students in increasing college access in academic settings? What are things that schools, teachers, school districts, colleges, and universities can do practically to increase college access? So what are ways, what are programs that we need to focus on to invest in? What are activities, what are things we need to be doing that help increase college access in the academic setting, the academic environment? That will actually be remaining right here, and that will be with Arlene. Exactly. So raise your hand, Arlene, so everyone will see. Arlene will be taking notes. We have a flip chart here in the room, and again, designate a note taker, a facilitator for that conversation. The second one we thought, again, based on what we heard from the conversations, were how can folks, all of us as a community, continue to support students practically in non-academic settings, right? So that's the wraparound services, the after-school programs, increasingly being referred to as integrated student supports, the nonprofit organizations, all the types of family engagement, right? Working with families, taking into consideration culture, all those pieces, and identity to help really sort of reach students where they are and help, the pieces of increasing ambition and so on, so that students continue. So that's the second conversation, which we'll have in the cafe right next door, where lunch was held for those who ate indoors, and that will. And if you follow Stephanie, she's going to be the note taker for that group. And then the third one that we thought we heard would be essentially on policy, on public policy. So the idea would be, what are public policies that you could recommend that public policy makers, whether that be public officials, whether that be the State Office of Higher Education, whether that be school boards, whether that be colleges and universities themselves, what are policies that you would recommend be implemented in that would open doors and increase college access for Hispanic students? One thing I do want to point out, a disclaimer, a clarifier I need to make, lest you go too far down the road in that conversation on the public policy side. As you know, we're the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics. We are federal employees. We are, in effect, structured through federal taxpayer dollars, and so we, by law, cannot engage in advocacy. So we are not able to entertain or to advance or to support conversations that go about specific legislation. And so what I would caution you to do is to think about public policies you would recommend, not necessarily about ways you would try to have those policies implemented. So if that makes sense, the distinction is important. Think about, in a perfect world, if you could wave the wand, what is it you think should be allowed and acceptable and so on? What is it you think, and again, a key way to think strategically about it is ways in which institutions can perhaps increase their policies, or change their policies, reform their policies to do so. What are ways in which states, state offices of education can change their policies? Because also, by the way, if you think about it, again, given some of the conversations we heard today, there are some things that folks have talked about that they would like to see that are not necessarily things that need to go through legislation, but there are actually policies that, again, it's simply a question of the policy makers and folks in those offices of education, in those school districts, who would simply need to decide to change, who they could do amongst themselves, making their own decisions. Does that make sense for everyone? Oh, sorry, and that one will be in room 1113, and that will be folks following Gabriel to find out, because Gabriel will be taking notes.
No, it doesn't make sense.
Oh, it doesn't make sense to the
Right.
untrained eye.
Yeah, exactly. So in the academic setting, we said there were three major issues. Number one, students are coming in at all ages and they lack academic language. So how do we address that issue? We were saying more professional development on what that means for the teachers, and also recognizing professional development and recognizing cultural differences and difficulties students may be facing. The other issue that we said was a concern were classroom sizes and the sheer numbers of things that needed to be done in a day. So what are some action steps for that? We said that's a good place to start reaching out to our community. Where are community resources? How do we build on the people in the community that can help us bridge those gaps? And then the third issue that often comes up is the misalignment of expectations. What does the administrator of the school expect? What do the teachers expect? What do the students or families expect? And what do the students expect? So how do we promote more communication and having those dialogues, round tables, discussions on serious issues that are getting in the way of student success, and having those dialogues not just within a school building, but having those dialogues in the community.
All right, my name is Ben Foreman. I'm the incoming Student Senate President here at Durham Tech. So I would just like to say on behalf of Durham Tech, we were really excited about hosting this here on campus, and we would love to do it again in the future anytime if that's ever a need. We were with policy, and we came up with 2 actionable objects. One, we decided that, or it was indicated that SAT is not a reliable indicator of success in school. So we wanted to do something that would have like increased access to training for the SAT, hopefully through community colleges, and there would actually be federal funding tied to that. So a lot of people in the private universities already have access to training. Some people in the community colleges and public universities don't. So yeah, have access to SAT training through community colleges. The second one is a type of accountability for colleges and universities. So we came up with a few things, but basically something similar to what you would get at a restaurant where there would be a rating. So when you go to the front page of any particular university or college, they would have stats. They would have the total 6-year graduation rate, the total 6-year graduation rate for Pell eligible students, and the total 6-year graduation rate for students of color or Hispanic students. Same thing for 4-year graduation rate for all of those things. And again, to have some type of accountability from the university for the product that they're putting out there and the product that people are spending so much money buying.
Thank you very much, everyone, for diving in deeply to those conversations and thinking critically about ways in which we can move this conversation forward and really bring about concrete, practical changes, positive changes for Hispanic students. As we mentioned, we're going to capture that. We're going to get the notes that all of our note takers took, as well as the flip chart paper, and we'll sort of be compiling all of that in a comprehensive report on the day. And as I mentioned, as we've reminded you several times, we're recording this session as well, so all of those things will be available online. And now we come to our closing speaker, who is not a stranger to this group, because you heard from her earlier today when she moderated one of the sessions. But I just want to tell you a little bit about this leader and the role that she has played in her work, and really just what an inspiration and a role model she is for us at the initiative. So one thing that folks may or may not be familiar with is that the initiative is established by executive order, and part of that executive order also establishes a President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for Hispanics. And that group is made up of 27 or so leaders from throughout the country in various fields, with various areas of expertise, all of whom are equally committed to increasing opportunities and improving outcomes in education for the Hispanic community. So they advise the President, the Secretary of Education, and they also work with the support of the initiative to advance specific ideas, specific efforts to shine a light on the specific areas of education in the Hispanic community. So our closing speaker, Lisette Nieves, is actually the co-chair of the Post-Secondary Education Subcommittee of that commission. She sits on the commission, having been appointed in 2010 to that commission, and she's had really quite an illustrious career thus far, which is all the more remarkable considering how much work she's done in just a few, relatively few short years. She is a visiting professor in public policy at the City University of New York, CUNY Brooklyn College, which you mentioned earlier. She was a founding executive director of Year Up New York, which is an outstanding nonprofit organization that folks should look into. As she mentioned earlier during the panel, it has a focus specifically about finding a way to bridge that space between secondary education, post-secondary education, and employment concretely. Building both hard and soft skills, and in fact even making connections to employment that is sustainable in a way that helps young people, particularly young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, to advance in their careers and support their families and advance their communities. She's worked for the City of New York. She's done a great many things. Her bio is actually in the program book. One of the things also we're most proud of, though, is that because unfortunately we still have far too few. We should certainly need more, and hopefully, again, through her leadership and her guidance, we'll have many more, but she is currently among the select few Latinos in the United States, Latinos or Latinas, who are Rhodes Scholars. So we have a true shining light, a bright spot, as we call it, among us. And then, as I mentioned earlier, her leadership on that commission has really inspired and motivated and guided our work at the initiative. So we couldn't be happier and more grateful to have her here with us to help sort of close the day and to, in fact, I think, make the transition, talking about how this college access question leads to more success and more achievement in post-secondary education. So with that, please welcome Lisette Nieves.
Thank you, Michael. I always say that this is the diehards of the day, right? This is the group that goes to the after party. This is the group, right? Is that? Oh, I see it out here. Oh, mira, they're all shaking their head. Thank you for that introduction. My closing remarks should actually be shorter than the introduction. But I want to say a couple of things that I think are pretty important, and just some of the takeaways for the day is that when we think about the completion agenda for this president for the year 2020, we need to think about it as not a one-size-fits-all. We need to think about it in a way that we understand that there are unique differences of some DACA students, but there are unique and not so unique commonalities across all Latino students. We need to understand that the beauty of America is that people consume education throughout their life. And so the idea of multiple pathways, we look at the City University of New York where I teach, and I have to say the fastest growing population is the older Latina returning that has 2 children at home, right? Isn't America great? Think about that, right? So to reach that goal of completion really means for us to understand the multiple pathways that we need to reach that agenda, that are going to be diverse and age appropriate and culturally appropriate to the groups we need to serve. The other thing I think that's important for us to do is to understand that higher ed is an enormous change right now. And it's a disruptive time right now that I think we should embrace. I'm so proud that we have a great community college hosting us today. But you know what? Transparency is going to be the challenge. There's no question. A rating system around this, young people or any student asking for what's the return on investment for them going to college are being asked in different ways. People are voting with their feet around where they go in ways that we haven't seen before. And I don't think we should be afraid of that. We should use that as part of the data that informs how we need to be thinking about a higher ed system that looks differently than it looks today. The last thing is I get to co-chair the subcommittee on higher ed with Dr. Luis Fraga. And June 9th and 10th, we're actually hosting a higher ed symposium in New York. And we are doing it and we're having it on 3 themes. So Michael Davis, who's here, I would love for any of you to email him if you're interested in coming. We have limited space, but it's because of the space, not because we don't want you there. We want you there. We're going to do it on 3 themes, and these themes are based on feedback from important symposiums like we're having today. One of the themes is on workforce and higher ed. What does it mean to actually have those 2? It's not an either or. Who does that well together? Who understands? It's not just access, persistence, completion. I always add the T, transition. We don't talk about the transition piece, and that's exactly where we've seen Latino students fall off, right? The other thing is we're going to do something on the rating system. And what does it mean, the rating system? Yeah, you know, colleges should be nervous. Absolutely. When we make data transparent, people should be afraid. Absolutely. Because we're going to learn things that we didn't know before. Because when you make data transparent, there's a shock, and then there's going to be policy solutions. And so we should be ahead of that curve looking at that data. Because it's not so easy to say, this school isn't where we're seeing completion and say that's not a good school. There could be some other reasons in there, but we need to see the data, right? And that will happen. It isn't when, it isn't is it gonna, it's gonna happen. And then the third one is really looking at the specific needs of community colleges. And what does that mean for community colleges? Because you can have a college here, and maybe the best thing they do is have certificates. And let me tell you something, for Latinos, the return on investment to be in a certificate program has a long-term impact as well for them, financial earnings. And we shouldn't dismiss that either. We should understand that and understand that's the way people are consuming education. So that's one option. The other option are those that are about feeding into 4-year colleges, right? They are as diverse as are the options. And so what do community colleges, what makes them more similar than different? And we're going to have a panel on that. We will have student speakers as well. I hope I whet your appetite. Did I do that? Thumbs up if I did. All right. Ooh, nice thumbs up. Okay. because at the end of the day, it is the feedback from these sessions that informs the policy recommendations that commissioners make to the administration. I'm not paid by the administration. Monica and I might disagree on things. I can do whatever I want in the public and whatever advocacy way I want, of course, with respect. But I feel really strong that recommendations should not come from a place that is not sound. It comes from all of you. And those 3 topics for that symposium we have in New York are the ones that came from at least half a dozen previous sessions like this. So what you put today in closing on your feedback today will inform future symposia. So with that, I just want to thank you all and know that if each one of us really takes it deeply, in a spiritual way, I will say that each of us lifts someone as we climb, we can reach these goals. And each of you are doing that just by being here. So thank you again for being part of today.